Major League Wrestling coming up this Thursday has a big event called One Shot. Special event and a TV taping. It'll be this Thursday, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. If you're in New York City or that area, go to the Melrose Ballroom. They're in Queens. Great facility. I was able to visit it about 4 years ago. It was great to be there. It is a fantastic setup for Major League Wrestling. If you're not able to be there, get it on Fight Plus. And as I mentioned, the TV tapings, you'll see that on future episodes of Major League Wrestling's Fusion show. Someone that will figure prominently in that event joins me on the hotline. Not only is he a former MLW World Heavyweight Champion, he was the first New Japan Strong Openweight Champion, and someone that does quite a bit of the talking, in this area. And I'm going to ask him about that here in a little bit. It is none other than Filthy Tom Lawlor. Tom, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm getting ready to fly out to New York here shortly to beat up a legend, not on the airwaves like you, but in the squared circle, a legend, Satoshi Kojima, a guy who I looked up to for years and years when I was in college, watching professional wrestling, watching him come in and help save All Japan as it was about to die, and become one of the most decorated wrestlers on the planet. And this is going to be the second time I get to face him. But the first time there was no fans. It was during the pandemic. Things are weird during that time. I expect a better Satoshi Kojima. I expect the absolute best Satoshi Kojima. And he hasn't slowed down over the years. The guy was the Noah GHC champion just last year. He's still lighting it up all across Japan. But, I'm going to show him that here in 2023, I'm the better fighter.
Okay. All right. Well, and I'm going to ask you about that here in a little bit. I want to ask you first. So, Major League Wrestling, this edition of Major League Wrestling was relaunched in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And I would venture to say, not to fill your head, so to speak, but when you were there from that beginning, from that relaunch. And so when people hear Major League Wrestling or MLW, I think a lot of fans think of you. Do you consider yourself the face of Major League Wrestling?
At one point, I think I would have. I think, and this still has happened even over the past few years before I came back to MLWs, people would stop me and mention, that they saw me wrestle there. You know what I mean? It wasn't like people had moved on. I was still associated with the company. Now, since I've been gone, Jacob Fatu had a long reign as champion. Hammerstone had an even longer reign as champion, if I'm not mistaken. So I think if you're going to put the title of the face of MLW on somebody, I think it's Fatu at this point. And quite frankly, I'd rather be the face of WTF, not MLW. You know what I mean? I've already been there, done that. It's time to move on.
Okay, I understand. I get that. And Jacob Fatu, one of the best guys out there, and just a fantastic in-ring wrestler, just a great competitor. Besides your MLW, WTF commitments, you also wrestle in New Japan, and last year you were able to take part in the G1 Climax, one of the absolute best tournaments that there is in pro wrestling. What was that experience like to be in the G1? You're over there for probably 2 months at least, going night after night after night. Just talk about that experience of competing in the G1 in 2022.
For me, I loved it. I got to do what I enjoy almost more than anything else, and that's fight people. It's focus on training, getting ready for matches 3 or 4 times a week. You know, being a fighter and an amateur wrestler, your kind of whole like life is built around these goals, these short-term goals. You know what I mean? And being able to be in the G1 gave me a lot of short-term goals. It was like being back in an amateur wrestling season, or doing the Ultimate Fighter tournament, or, you know, doing the PFL season, where there's very little else that you can or have time to focus on other than wrestling, other than being a better wrestler, other than you know, training mentally, physically, all the aspects that it takes to be at the top of the game. You have to throw yourself into that, and there's nothing more than I wanted to do. There's nothing more I want to do. You know what I mean? You said last year I was in the G1. You didn't say this year, and you know that stings a little bit that I wasn't brought back. I love professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I love to be in Japan because I grew up. I would say grew up, like my formative young adult years were spent watching a lot of Japanese pro wrestling and a lot of Japanese MMA. And that is where I wanted to be when I was younger. And now that I'm older, I want to be younger. So that's where I want to be once again.
Right. I get you. In what you something you just said, and it kind of brings it to mind. You said you watched you loved Japanese pro wrestling, Japanese MMA, and it seems like a lot of wrestlers today have that love as well. They whether it's the heyday of all Japan, or the early days of New Japan, or anything like that. You look at guys like Eddie Kingston and others that seem to almost fashion their style after what was seen in Japanese pro wrestling, Japanese MMA. What is it about the Japanese style that I guess attracts you so much?
I think honestly, nowadays, with how diverse wrestling is and how you can view wrestling from all over the world in different parts of the world like you couldn't before, I don't think the styles are as easy to, separate, right? Like, sure, lucha libre is its own world, right? But if you watch a lot of what now is kind of mainstream American wrestling, it's very similar to what the mainstream Japanese style is. You know what I mean? There's not companies out there like UWFI, which are doing a completely different sort of shoot style and still drawing big crowds. Like, that's not just happening. So to me, I think that those two styles are very similar nowadays, right? But if you look back to when the earlier years, the years of the WWF, like when I was growing up, it's Hulk Hogan, Brutus Beefcake, guys like that. And that style is very, very stark contrast to what you'd see in Japan. And also, like nowadays, we kind of take it for granted because it's been 30 years or something where we've seen guys doing high flying moves and, smaller guys doing spectacular matches, where that wasn't commonplace really until WCW Nitro. But there was a scene of junior heavyweights lighting it up in Japan. You know what I mean? So nowadays, I think that they're like virtually identical in most cases. But back in the day, they were just so different. And I think that's what a lot of people, were kind of drawn towards. And I mean, and I think if you did maybe I'm wrong, but if you did like a comparison chart or did a survey, I think there's still a lot more wrestlers out there in the US who are who looked up to American wrestling as their, heroes, as compared to the people who looked up to the Japanese wrestlers. But I think that the people obviously who are more, I don't want to say hardcore, but who are more willing to search out obscure stuff are usually a little bit more willing to talk about it too.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's it. It's interesting. Like I said, I see a lot of it. I see a lot of on the indie scene. I work with a couple of indie promotions here in Austin, and I see a lot of influences of the Japanese style. And it, as crazy it sounds, it almost reminds me of back in the mid days with World Class, because it was always said that if you were going to go work for Fritz von Erich, it was going to be very stiff, and it was going to be, almost a shoot style, kind of wrestling that you would see. Am I far off on that?
As far as what? I mean,
just kind of a the very stiff, very hard hitting style of world class wrestling.
Yeah.
In Dallas Fort Worth, as as it relates to what we would see in Japan.
That's one of the biggest. I don't want to pull the curtain back too much, but the Japanese guys are very, very good workers, very, very safe. And I think they're pulling the wool over a lot of people's eyes. You know what I mean? Because in the US, I'll get creamed by a lot of guys, you know what I mean, who think that they're doing a certain style, think that they're doing a Japanese or more shoot style. Now, with that being said, there are certain guys who have just like absolutely obliterated me. You know what I mean? Like, I had a 6-man tag maybe a month or so ago with the West Coast Wrecking Crew against Masato Tanaka, Brian Keith, and Calvin Tankman. And I remember at one point during the match, myself and Royce Isaacs were on the floor after getting beat up a little bit, and we both go like, man, Masato Tanaka is stiff, isn't he? You know what I mean? So there are certain guys, and obviously he's like a Japanese legend. So I say a lot of the guys might be pulling the wool over some people's eyes. There's certainly other guys who are just laying it in there. Like with the way wrestling is now, or at least the way that I approach wrestling, and I show up all over the world on various shows of different sizes. I almost never know what I'm gonna get in a lot of cases, and sometimes it works out for me, sometimes it doesn't. Luckily, I'm still here, but the guys that I'm least worried about, you know what I mean, are the Japanese guys.
Understand completely. So, I want to ask you. You are a frequent contributor to Wrestling Observer, to a lot of their radio shows, podcasts, whatever. Like for instance, you appear regularly with Mike Supervivi, who's on this show. Actually, on this episode, you appear with him quite often when he's hosting Wrestling Observer Live by himself. How much do you enjoy that? And is it something that you could see doing once you decide to finally hang it up in the ring?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to Brian, obviously, about, what my future is going to be. I'm only going to be able to wrestle for so long. But like the way it is now, the opportunities are limited. It's not as if people are raking in, millions of dollars on the independent wrestling journalism scene.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, I think I've got to sort of forge my own path, I guess, in some way, and figure out a way to get more eyes on, I think, MMA coverage. Because I think that not like, as far as a sport goes, I think the coverage of MMA is fine, but what I think it is missing is something sort of like the Observer. You know what I mean? Sort of like some inside information, but a lot of these guys are uptight. You know what I mean? I like some comedy in my sports as well, and I think that there's a lot of room for MMA coverage crossover with wrestling fans, because there's whether they know it or not, there's tons of interpersonal stories. You know, there's tragic things that go on in people's lives. There's great experiences that they have, and some of these fighters are like guys on the undercard who may not get the time to talk about it, or maybe it's a guy who loses the fight and doesn't get the microphone afterwards, but hell, he just went through something, you know, amazing in his life. You know, and I think that's one thing that mixed martial arts and the UFC doesn't do well, and that is use the guys who are not the perennial main eventers to further stories.
Okay. I get that. I love comedy myself. So and you're right. Any type of independent wrestling, I hate to call it journalism, but you know, at least media coverage. Yeah, it's a forge your own path kind of thing. And you know, I get it. I believe me. I do this out of love. It's definitely not out of
Yeah.
money.
I
You're
mean,
right.
don't get me wrong. Like, when I get to go on Fridays and host with Mike, I love it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's something we were doing shows just on our own.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? After UFCs on Saturday nights because we wanted to, because we wanted to sit there and talk to each other. Have, you know, maybe have a few beers before, not let anybody know about it. But
Yeah.
hey, you know what I mean? We're having a good time. So
Look,
anytime I can make money doing that, it's even better.
right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I
It's
do.
tough.
Believe me. And Mike is fantastic. What's funny is, of course, because he and I are football fans as well, we'll talk for a good 15, 20 minutes about football before we even get to the wrestling.
Yeah.
So yeah, believe me, I get it. Recently you have revealed yourself as a member of the World Titan Federation. Um, what attracted you to be a part of this? And are is the WTF looking to take over Major League Wrestling?
We're taking over.
Okay.
Look at this group. Before I'll tell you a story in a second, but just look at the group of people that MSL has assembled. Matt Cardona, right? This guy's making more money on the independent wrestling scene than probably anyone has ever done. Who wouldn't want to be associated with him? He's got the modern day China by his side, Steph DeLander. Now, in the past, you know, MSL had Davey Boy Smith Jr. I hope he makes it back. Gene Snitsky, a member of the WTF. A man who showed up at the last set of tapings, Josh Bishop, one of my guys. I've been wrestling with him in Cleveland, Ohio for years. I was there at his first match. And this guy's ready. He's ready to tear it up and take over, baby. And then Hammerstone, myself, it's a pretty decorated group of guys. It's like if you had an E-Fed and you know had 5 slots to fill on a team, you'd probably pick some of the guys on WTF. Now, as an aside to that, what would it be if I look at the clock? 18 years ago or about, I walked into a wrestling school, FXE Wrestling, which was in Orlando, Florida. It's now in Nashville, Tennessee, or outside of there. And while there was a number of other guys there, there was one guy, of course, sitting down on the couch in a velour tracksuit, even back then, watching me take my first bumps. And one of those guys was MSL. So the fact that he's still going today, the fact that he's assembled this group and was already looking to take over MLW, it was a no-brainer for me.
Okay, I get it. Let's talk about Thursday night, One Shot there in Queens. You mentioned you're going to face the legendary Satoshi Kojima. You talked about it a little bit, but one of the things, and I heard you call him out, you mentioned about the fact that he was the very first MLW World Heavyweight Champion. You are a former World Heavyweight Champion, and you call yourself the best MLW World Heavyweight Champion. And you kind of framed it along the lines of the best MLW World Champion versus the first MLW World Champion. What can we expect when you take on the Bread Club Warrior this Thursday night at MLW One Shot?
I'm bringing the heat to Kojima. Like I said earlier, I was a big fan of Kojima when I was younger. I can't tell you how many countless nights I spent in bed watching him fight Great Muta, Taiokeya, a number of guys, Tenzan, across different promotions. And back then, I always thought to myself, if I could get my hands on this guy, if I could get into New Japan, if I could get into the Japanese scene one day, I could beat this guy. And he actually came over and, as we mentioned, was the first MLW champion, right? The first ever MLW heavyweight champion. And when I won that belt, that was one of the things that I was most proud of, was the fact that I now held the title that was first held by Satoshi Kojima. I mean, one of the most decorated guys, IWGP champion, also at the same time was the All Japan Triple Crown champion, right? Everybody across the world knows how great this guy is. And everybody across the world should know how great I am. And like I said, I already beat Satoshi Kojima one time, but that was years ago. I don't even count that. The way I look at it is it's 0-0. We're walking in with a clean slate because I don't know what was on his mind. He had just flown over from Japan. I actually had a shoot fight like 2 days prior to that. You know, this is a blank slate, and I'm expecting the best Kojima. I'm expecting a better Kojima than wrestled Eddie Kingston. I'm expecting a better Kojima than wrestled CM Punk. I'm expecting a better Kojima than the one that beat Go Shiozaki last year for the GHC title. But like I said, and like I'm going to prove at One Shot, I am the best MLW heavyweight champion of all time. And right now, I am in my prime. I am the premium quality, not only heavyweight champion MLW's ever had, but the best wrestler that is in that ring today.
Okay.
And Thursday.
It should be a fantastic bout. This Thursday night, MLW One Shot, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. Get it on Fight TV Plus. If you are in the New York City area, head to the Melrose Ballroom there in Queens. Check out some great action. He is Filthy Tom Lawlor. Tom, before I let you go, 2 things. Number 1, tell everybody how they can find you on social media, promote all your stuff. Tell everybody how they can get more of Filthy Tom Lawlor.
At about, I'd say, 11:30 p.m. every night, take a look outside your window. I may be there. If not, you can catch me on X at Filthy Tom Lawlor, FILTHYTOMLAWLOR. And it's also the same thing on Instagram. If I'm on any other social media websites, they're either fakes or don't let anybody know.
All right. The other thing is, I want to see if I want to get a liner for my show from you. Would you be willing to do that?
No.
Okay.
No, sure.
So the name of the show is Sports Guys Talking Wrestling.
Yeah.
So whenever you're ready.
This is Filthy Tom Lawlor, and you are listening to Sports Guys Talking Wrestling, the filthiest show on the radio.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Filthy Tom Lawlor. Catch him Thursday night, MLW One Shot. I appreciate it. All the best, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.